What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And like always, the J. David Group, which is my company, is sponsoring this podcast. We help recruit today's go-to-market teams that will lead the next generation of unicorns. Because like I've been saying lately, you can't build unicorns if you don't have the goats of growth. This podcast is also being sponsored by Lego, which allows you to record all your best content for practice, collaboration, and feedback, and gives sales teams a way to organize all their best content in one place so it's easily accessible to help improve sales performance for everyone. Email me, web@thejdavidgroup.com, so I can introduce you to someone who will take great care of you. Now, my guest today is Joe Breen, a senior sales leader who has led startups through hypergrowth, including SecureWorks, which grew from $1 million to $300 million over his time there. Was also led to an acquisition by Dell. Most recently, he was with Newspire and hit his revenue goal, 5-year revenue goal, in just 3.4 years, while scaling the team from 14 to 40. I invited him on to talk about how he's been able to continually produce results. Joe, welcome to Over Quota.
Hey, good to be here, Jay. Really was interested when we first started talking. I like your approach and look forward to having a great conversation.
Fantastic. Awesome. I'm glad you said yes. And frankly, I'm glad you're here. So
yeah. Yes.
So tell me, one of the things when we had our first, pre-interview, if you will, to get to know each other, one of the things that stuck out that you said to me was, you said it kind of matter-of-factly, but I find it interesting. You said, you're brought in to solve problems, right? You've always been brought in to solve problems, which I guess at a high level, that's why a company would seek to add a leader, because there's a challenge of some sort. Either they just don't have a leader, or they have a leader that they'd like to upgrade, if you will. But you seem to have a little bit of a gleam in your eye when you said that. So I'm curious, tell me, what is it about solving big problems that gets you up in the morning and says, this is something that I want to tackle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it goes down to your DNA as a person. For me, and I can just relate to my other peers in the business and their backgrounds. Part of it comes from my background as a leader and going back to my days as a college athlete. I was a walk-on football player. And most people think of, football as a very physical sport, which it is. I thought it was an intellectual challenge for me. I was smaller and faster than most of the players. And for me, it's a gigantic chess match. How could I outsmart them? And that imprinted on my mind that perhaps I was comfortable in difficult situations because I had some success doing that. And so I think my mindset was always looking for that angle or that leverage that maybe others weren't seeing or weren't willing to try. And so as I went beyond that and got into the business world, it seemed to be my natural instinct or my natural observation was to look at companies or technologies that for whatever reason weren't as funded, or the people were talented but couldn't pull it together, and there's enough runway there to make something good. And so that's always been my angle, and I sort of walked into it. Whereas other peers, they may have been good at taking something that was already, 3/4 built and making it run from there, where I tended to start off, maybe we were a quarter or halfway there. And I learned, stayed with it long enough to learn some best practice and mindsets that enabled it to grow.
Do you get bored? Does it not interest you to have to take something that is 3/4 of the way there? In other words, do you think you'd even be as excited or even as good taking it from 3/4 to something else?
There are probably some areas where I get a little bored, or I have times where I probably would not think it's exciting. I have been involved, and there's a big question where, sort of an existential question when Dell acquired us.
Mhm.
I went from a 3,500 employee company to 100,000 employees. And it's a different mindset. That's one of the reasons why I stayed on at Dell for 3 years, because I wanted to get engrossed or engaged in that type of corporate environment where things were really set in many ways,
Mm.
and maneuver within that. And I saw that as a challenge. And yes, ultimately, I felt like after about 3 years, it's a slower pace, it's a different motion. I wanted to get back into the startup motion more because I can make a bigger impact. Nothing against the Dell corporate work, is a great culture.
Yep.
It's really a good culture, and I could have stayed there, forever. But I just found it a little bit more in line with my energy and my spirit and what I want to do. Go into a more startup role where things are not as established and I can make an impact.
Before I go on, I know somebody in my audience is wondering, and frankly now so am I. What position did you play? What position in football did you play?
I was the boundary corner. In other words, the slow corner, the one that is lined up on the shortest distance to the sideline. And so
Right.
most of the time I rolled up, or it was obvious, going to go quickly into my zone. So it made up for my lack of speed after 30 yards.
There you go. And that's where the angles and the leverage came into play, right?
Yes, exactly.
So let me ask you this then. So speaking of angles and leverage, when you were deciding to join Newspire, first of all, describe to me the state of the company when you were joining Newspire, and then what angles and leverage did you see that you could perhaps exploit, take advantage of, that maybe others just had missed up until that point?
Yeah. I think we missed slight pivots that in reality can be large pivots. Give you an example. Like at Newspire, it was a legacy founded business, been around 18 years. They had great relationships, established relationships with the big auto manufacturers, GM, Ford, VW, Audi, Subaru. And they were providing services for their dealerships across North America, thousands of customers, but their customer base was small and their ARR was small, anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 a year, because they were smaller companies they were servicing or providing support on.
Mm-hmm.
And for the value of the company, that the founder wanted to go upstream into mid-market and small enterprise, but that was a different game. You had to go provide more in-depth, complex managed services and SaaS services, and they really weren't willing or able to do that effectively. So the PE firm came and searched for people who'd done that before. And so they came to me and say, Joe, you need to take a legacy local business and make it a larger orientation where it's providing enterprise services or true mid-market services to a larger market. In other words, identify the service portfolio that you need to build, identify the target segments you need to go to. You don't have your current team needs to be rebuilt because it's geared towards smaller entities. You need to target a more sophisticated buyer. There's no CRM, there's no processes, there's no people. Build the whole thing from the ground up, basically. And so that was my mission. And so we it's like taking I just say it in a car, taking what you see a Honda Civic and making it a Lexus.
Right. Okay. And so with that, how do you, with all those initiatives that you just mentioned, right? New target segment, building a team, have more sophisticated buyers, you have to build the whole thing from the ground up. Where do you begin? In other words, there are a lot of priorities. How do you actually prioritize and say, okay, this is the first thing that I'm going to do, and then once I do this, this is the second thing I'm going to do, and as a result of doing those things, everything else will be easier. Like, where do you begin?
That's a great question. I think it's changing today's sales game, and it's very relevant. This is 3.5 years ago, and I started seeing it. The client experience is more and more important, from a product experience and from a SaaS experience and from a managed service experience. It's very, very important that, to grow and build momentum in the market is very much viral now. What I mean by that is people are more apt to, if they like something, talk about it. And the marketing motion at the top of the funnel is, people obviously define who they're interested in more at the top of the funnel, but to really drive real traction and build beachheads, you have to provide a great client experience. So I started, the first day I went in when I got on board, and maybe it was the second or third day, I went into our secure operations and our NOC operations, network operations center, and I said, what do we do well? What client experience do we provide, and what can we do well now, and what we don't do well, and what is it going to take to provide a good experience in this type of target market where it's more sophisticated? What is our current technology? What is the expertise of our current staff? I needed to know exactly where we are now, so I know how do we get to in the future, because the client experience is more important than the actual go-to-market motion. Although in a SaaS experience, in a product world, yeah, you can build a product and it's up to the owners or the buyer to make it a great experience primarily. In the SaaS world, we're probably responsible for making that experience good from day one. So I attacked the client experience, and then immediately at the same time was building the go-to-market motion, because you have to sort of fake it till you make it, right? You have to build it until your experience catches up to that in many ways in startups.
Well, let me ask you this. What did you learn from the folks about the client experience, and what did they do well, I should say? Like, what were you doing well that you could improve the client experience? And then how do you simultaneously build a go-to-market experience if you may not have all of the full picture about what you guys are doing well? Or is it really quick and transactional? What do we do well? This is what we do well.
Yeah.
It took a day and then you went. Like, tell me about that.
You want to simplify something that sounds complicated from day one.
Okay.
So the language that you use is the language that the people you're targeting, the buyers, understand. And the language they use, other people can understand about your differentiation and value. Because as you know, in the sales experience, you're contacting the economic buyer, influencers, but they're talking amongst themselves. And it's very important that they can communicate your differentiation in simple terms, and be able to show it to them in simple terms on their own, so they can say, hey, we prefer Newsfire over Arctic Wolf or someone else because we understand what they're going to do. So first of all, simplifying. And one of the things I first did, my first question, in a kind of security experience is something going bad, will they contact you, right? If you're providing that service, hey, how good are we at contacting them when things are bad? And I asked our SOC manager, what are we responding to? And he said, we're not responding to anything right now. We have it all tuned down. I said, well, that's the beachhead right there, where we have to be able to respond when something bad is on their network. So I instantly worked with our operations team and working out, hey, when can we start responding to the type of events that our clients are looking for us to respond? So and so that was the first step. Had them working on that as we were building the go-to-market. And our go-to-market was very simple. We tried to differentiate by simplifying the service delivery experience by essentially saying, hey, we stop the bad stuff and allow the good stuff, and create a motion where it's simplified, where we sound simpler than our competition, and made it simple for our operations team to respond as well. So simplification was our first step in doing this.
Now, I would imagine that the simplification also found its way into the messaging as far as outbound emails and calls, slide decks, I would imagine as well. Is that right?
Yes. It was, that was very important. Simplify the content. And as you, as you go across in the sales process, your first messaging really needs to be simple and differentiated and understandable. Then as they sort of see your angle on the solving the problem, they want to understand more. So what we found out as that simple message got people's attention, they wanted to understand, well, how do you do it? What's your process for doing it? How do you really do it? So we found out our content build was really was focused on how we do it and our processes behind it. And the more detailed we could articulate our process and how we do it, the more sophisticated we sounded, and more professional and mature we sounded. So our content build was simple, high level, angle approach, how we attack the problem. Then really probably 80% of our content build was how do we do it? How do they experience us? Rather than the traditional, very high level feature benefit marketing, fluff, to really focusing on how we do it.
At what point did you decide, or was this simultaneous as far as going up market and calling on more sophisticated buyers? And also, were they the same buyers and just at larger organizations? Like, how did you figure that out to make sure that you had the right?
It's a journey. It was a journey. You have to. That's a great question. We started the mid-market and a little smaller at first because we didn't have complicated solutions. We were just learning, crawl, walk, run. Hey, what can we experience? Let's simplify our solution set. This is what we do well, which were geared toward the mid-market. And after our operations team and our client experience started getting more sophisticated, then we started going upstream to the enterprise. Now, when we did target enterprise, when we came across enterprise early on, we limited that experience early on to a couple of clients that actually taught our operations team to deliver on an enterprise experience. And that taught our team how to deliver a more sophisticated, complicated experience. So yeah, we went to mid-market, targeted some enterprise clients, landed some enterprise clients, and essentially built that sophisticated enterprise experience from that experience. They sort of became our demo experience that taught our team how to deliver at a more sophisticated level. And as they got better, then we focused more energy and targets on the enterprise level.
Was that a strategic approach or decision that you made in terms of going to that particular customer and saying, hey, help us? In other words, asking them a bunch of questions that would help you? Okay.
We're very transparent. Well, this is not what we're doing now. Would you be willing to partner with us and help us get there? And it was the right customer set. They were willing to, they thought of a partnership. They were frustrated with previous vendor relationships. They didn't feel like they were a partner. So we're willing to collaborate to get you to point B. We're at point A. You want to get to point B. We want to get to point B too. Let's work together to that. And actually became a very tight relationship and a very positive relationship. I will mention one thing. It's key when you're targeting your segments. So, to go from target segment A to segment M, you have to go through A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, that's a big jump. We did just a smaller jump. From a branding perspective is very, very important because people judge you by your brand and your initial engagement. We had strong references from GM, Subaru, these big Fortune 1000 companies, right? So they were manufacturing companies. So we made a decision that let's go toward the manufacturing market that will understand and respect and gain credibility. If we say, yeah, we're doing this for GM, Subaru, Ford. So we targeted tier 1 manufacturing suppliers to those OEMs and other manufacturers where that name carried branding influence and credibility. So that made the front end of the funnel build easier because we're able to leverage some big brand name manufacturers that help us circumvent some of the branding credibility build that we didn't have early on.
What mistakes or I'll say deficiencies were uncovered as you were learning how to start selling to the enterprise? Like, I guess that first customer, I'm assuming, has illuminated some of those, but what mistakes were made? What were the deficiencies, and how quickly were you able to sort of right them, I guess, and make sure that they were?
Learning the right language. Sometimes we assume this language is important for one buyer, but it was not important for another one. That was very key, very important, understanding the right language. The other one was tailoring our content to in understanding what specific pain angles they were interested in. We assumed that, and you can make this mistake oftentimes, that you assume one pain is the same pain of someone else. They may experience that shoulder pain, the same shoulder pain, but everybody experiences it differently. It could be a dull pain, it could be a sharper pain. So understanding, not just because you know a particular segment, that the particular solution is experience is different from one customer to another. And so that probably hindered us in scaling more rapidly. But you know, it happens, and we learn from that as fast as we could.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned shoulder pain. I was grinning there. It hit home a little bit because we just had to take my my 7-year-old to the emergency room a couple of weeks ago because he's been having shoulder pain. It's nothing. We had to get X-rays, and it's nothing too serious, but it's just sort of one of those things. So, anyways, that's why
I think also one of the things, you know, this buying game has changed. I think some of our more experienced sellers have been used to selling on a brand name and selling feature benefit selling. And when you know, we had to watch this, and we had some failures, and as we brought in some people that I had known from that were big brand sellers in the security space, and selling with a non-branded company and just selling the features and benefits did not work. And you have to really be good at digging for pain and understanding the challenges and aligning your unique capabilities to those challenges. We hire some people that were used to having a brand name. If you sort of do a demo, a presentation, or a first discovery, that's enough. But when you're a no brand company, you really have to dig further to understand their buying process, their pains, and sort of outflank the competition who maybe have more branding and more awareness than others.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to ask is that how much did you have to turn over the current team and then start hiring the right people, and how quickly were you able to do that?
Yeah, we had a legacy team that we kept on this legacy market, and we just uplifted their sales process, the more sophisticated process. For this mid-market enterprise, we created a whole new team. We hired a whole new, we had a CRM, we had sales processes, we had content, and we hired a whole new team from that. So that 14 was the existing, the remainder, what, 31 or whatever the 27 were incremental people that we brought into the organization to target this new market. We did have some turnover the first 16 months. I'd say we turned over half the reps. We had people who were, is our miscalculation that we had some people who were successful at larger organizations selling similar services that we could retrofit to this. That did not happen. We assumed and we trained on that, but it's difficult today, especially in North America sellers. Many of them are tied to their organization brand and or leverage to the brand. To train someone who's, you know, do something different and dig deeper, it's a tough challenge. And so I think you're seeing more and more in the SaaS world and the PaaS world and the IaaS world, you're seeing when people are scaling, and you see this on LinkedIn all the time, that people are looking for more curious thinking people and who are persistent and hardworking and transparent and good communicators to complement your sales team. You want to build a foundation across a lot of seasoned people, but your incremental growth and incremental scale comes from taking talented people who can grasp your process and execute it.
How do you assess for that? How do you screen and know that you have somebody that's curious? And
that's a big challenge today in the sales world. Onboarding good sales reps and getting them to be predictive immediately, I think, is the biggest challenge in the sales world now. We haven't perfected that. I don't think many companies have perfected it. What we've learned and what I've learned is a good sound onboarding process that engages the seller and asks and forces them to explain what they know and don't understand, is paramount. So having a high level of transparency and integrity in what I know and don't know, also understanding how people learn. You have a hobby, Jay, you have other hobbies. Some people like cars, some people like, college sports, some people like art, some people like writing. What I've found most effective in understanding is understanding how they learn, their interests, and how they grow their passions. And you find out people learn really or can observe and digest information really through their passions. Are they a visual learner, or they have to read it over and over again, have to write it out over and over again? If you can understand how they really learn stuff and able to convey what they learn is really a key understanding of sellers, of potential sellers, and then gearing your training program toward how they learn, and then getting them to present over and over again what they know and don't know is a real key asset or key process.
So when you say that, is there a context in which you'd have dynamic learning content? In other words, if somebody is more of a visual learner, are you going to create, a video library to show them certain
Yeah,
ways?
I think you have to have like a triangle of things. You have to have visual, you have to have written, and you have to have just observing, reading, of comprehension of the content. I think you have to have all three, because I've looked at a lot of onboarding training tools. They all incorporate all three. Shorts, YouTube, like examples of 2 to 3 minute learning, and having them go back and write what they've heard, and then have them, write what they understand and what they don't understand, and have them articulate certain meaningful words like, what's the difference in prevention and detection in the security space? Have them understand that and write it out is really important.
And it might go back to what you were saying at the very beginning, which is simplification, right? In other words, to make whatever form that they learn it in, to make sure that it's simple enough where they can learn it as quickly as possible, remember it, and then, to your point, be able to explain it, because you were saying that they needed to be able to simplify the message to the buyer, right, to the prospect, so to be able to learn it and communicate it back in a way to the buyer. So that makes sense as well.
Yeah, and also in their own language that they understand. The biggest problem we see in technology and talk to buyers, they know within the first 5 seconds, this seller doesn't understand what they're talking about. They're using big words. They're not using the language that they usually talk about. And they rely on marketing terms and training that they had maybe 6 or 8 and 9 months ago on a term, which people don't talk that way in common language.
So let me ask you this, because you mentioned in our pre-interview there that you are a servant leader. First, define for me what that means to you, but then also when you have a seller that is struggling, and maybe that's the particular struggle that they have, whereas they are speaking in jargon as opposed to just speaking directly and to a buyer, to a customer, how do you coach someone like that who has everything else out of them?
That's a great question. It depends on the personality and who you're talking to. And really, it's a series of things, right? We all want to communicate very clearly. If there's something that a behavior or a suggestion that we have, we need to be transparent with people and say, in our experience, have them, first of all, observe someone else doing it or hear someone else doing it. This is what is a best practice that is proven to be effective. And so, obviously showing them recall recordings, tools like Gong and all the other recall recording tools is always good to have have them see what other people are doing, but not just have them show it, but why do you think that worked? Ask them so they can observe themselves and experience themselves. How do you think that worked? What did you think? What did the buyer hear? What did the buyer say when they said this? And see if you can get them to think inside the mindset of the seller and the buyer, because that's sort of the real experience. Have them understand for themselves what really happened, because we all have a different observation, right? We all watch, a singer, and some people say, "Oh, I really love how they hit the high notes. Oh, I really love how they hit the low notes. I enjoy how they say the emotion. They all have a different experience, but what we want to do in the best practice for that client experience is have them understand the different levels and layers of that experience, from a hearing, a listening, to what you say, how you say it, and then the logic behind it. Hey, this buyer is, their big concern is, the client experience, or the implementation, or during the meeting the SLAs at this certain time. So we really have to understand really what the buyer is saying and what's important to them. So bringing those multi-layers of understanding and comprehension on an emotional level, logical level, and intellectual level is very important.
Now, when you say servant leader, tell me a little bit more about how you're able to, manage somebody through a tough time. But what does that mean? What should that look like for people?
Yeah, there's an ideal and there's a reality. We all try to, honestly, we want to make a good experience for everybody. We want to listen. But when you're scaling a team, when you go from 5 to 50 to 100 people, you're going to lose that personal connection. The culture has to build it. The culture has to be that servant leadership or that servant experience. So it's very important that you have good leaders that echo that and execute that way. I think really listening is the biggest thing that a leader can do. Really listen to your employee. Really listen. And dig into, like, hey, I'm not having a good day. Well, really, what do you mean?
Because, yeah, I'm sorry. Yep, go ahead.
Really understanding and be there. Say, what can I do to support you today?
Because if they're not, if you as a leader are only telling them, frankly, what you want to tell them without listening, and you're saying, this is what you should do, this is what you didn't do better, do this next time, what's the impact on that?
Yeah, that's not really good, right?
Yeah.
If you're always sort of, hey, you need to do this better. You want them to ask you, right? Hey, what, you're the leader. What do you think I could do better? Ultimately, they do ask that in no other ways. Help me they could do it and, like, help me, tell me what I should be doing, or help me understand. What do you think? You always have that opportunity, but what you really want to get where they see the game themselves. And they take it and run. What all the thing you're trying to do is a culture and a process. This is what we've seen as the best process. We want you to understand it and then make it better. You own it and make it better. What can you do? What do you think we could do better with it? So you want to turn it around where is this? Yeah, we have tools, technologies, sales processes, challenger solution selling, not different than anybody else is doing, but you really want to get to the point where you own it. Your goal is for them to own it and make it better. And that's what was great about different perspectives and, different thought constructs, is that they all add a different way to doing it that will add a better color to the overall narrative. And
obviously, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I really try to challenge them. No, it's your motion. You make it better.
So obviously you've had a lot of success, but I would imagine you've struggled from time to time. It's something maybe not, over long periods of time, but putting yourself in the shoes of the person that we were just alluding to, right? Somebody that's just struggling. When you've been struggling, what do you do to pull yourself out of it? Or who did you turn to ask, like, what am I missing? What do I need to do to be better? Like, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of angles I take on that. There are trusted people on my team that I value their angle or their perspective. And as a leader, I think it's good to be honest with them. Say, hey, I don't think this is working well. I don't think what I'm saying here is very effective. I don't see the action happening. What is your perspective on it? What can I do that would add a better experience for this? So there are people on your team that you should go to. I think there are peers that observe you from within your company that you trust, that you should ask them, hey, what do you observe here? I'm not seeing, the sellers sort of follow the process. when you engage them, what do you experience? From a deployment, if it's operations, how are they relating? And is there anything that you observe that I am not doing that could help gain better alignment? And then I think there's people that know you as a person and know you professionally longer through your career. I think it's good to share problems or challenges with them as well. And also, I think it's very important that each of us as a leader write down an inventory of our strengths and weaknesses on a regular basis. If there wasn't a good experience, look at my part. What was my part in this? If I hired 3 sellers that didn't come in and go well, what was my part in it? Was I involved? How was I involved in the hiring process, selection process? What was my input in the training process? And look at where me as a leader, what can I do better next time? I think as a leader, we're always on a daily basis looking what we do well and what we don't do well. And I think writing it down is very important. This was the problem. What was my part in it? In my part, how did that impact it? And then moving forward, how can I improve that? And so maybe sometimes like me getting out of it. A lot of times is me getting out of it and letting the owners own it.
And it sounds to me like, given what you just said, that there's 2 things to write down. There's constantly monitoring your strengths and weaknesses and writing them down. And then there's also self-assessing something in real time that isn't working and saying, okay, here's what's not working, or here's what just didn't work. And here's what went right, and here's what went wrong. And here's where there might be an area of improvement. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then with the broader, the strengths and weaknesses, because it's funny, like when you say write down, constantly writing down your strengths and weaknesses. If I didn't hear the word constantly, I would just say, okay, write down the strengths and weaknesses, and that's it. I'm done for my life, right? I know what my strengths are. I know everything.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that that's dynamic. It's changing. It's fluid.
Yeah.
Right?
Every day I'm looking at the experience. What was a good experience today? What did someone say that was working well and not? And so as a leader, we have to evolve all the time. And our team teaches us how to be better. And I have to be open to that. And because when I do that, then the team feels like there's synergy, there's magic, and there's alignment. And they can take the ball and run, or sing the song that they didn't think they could sing, or communicate in a way they never were open to communicating before. So that's when I find the magic multiple occurs. Also, what I find many times in my own stuff, I thought people understood. I thought I was clear in communicating, and I wasn't. No one understood what the hell I was talking about. And I just assumed they understood.
Yes. Yeah. I use a tool internally here. It's an impact filter that helps me get out what's in my brain onto a piece of paper so that I can share it. It's in a document so that I can share it with my team, because I have a tendency to get excited, enthusiastic, and might talk a little bit too fast occasionally, and get people to buy in at like, yeah, like shaking their head, yeah, and then all of a sudden, like, we hit the end button or we leave the meeting or something, and then like 5 minutes later, like,
yeah, and nothing's really happened.
Right? Like, what did he want me to do?
Yeah.
Like,
and I find as I've gotten higher in organizations, there is a tendency people to say yes to the boss,
right?
That everything you say is a good idea, and people just I'm not gonna do that,
Right. I am so conscious of that because, I'm like, not everything I say cannot just be right. You know what I mean? It can't be, or it can't be landed. Even if it is right, it can't be landing perfectly every single time. Somebody has this miscommunication somewhere, something is unclear. And it's like, I hope that you feel comfortable enough to tell me that it's unclear or that you disagree, and maybe not with everything I said, but maybe just one aspect of what I'm saying,
Yeah.
How do you know when to listen, and how do you know when to stop listening? In other words, you know what I mean? Like, how do you know when it's like, okay, this is just a noise at this point?
Yeah.
It's not really getting to the heart of, what really needs to be solved right now, or this is just an excuse, not necessarily like, you know what I mean? Like, how do you?
Yeah. I tell you, I wish I could give the right logical question or answer response. mine's more ethereal. What I mean, intuitive or instinctual. I sort of know when, hey, this is real stuff and this is sort of fluff, or they're trying to game, or they're trying to make it more than it is or worse than it is.
Mhm.
And I think that's where the inventory process goes in all the time, where you're always trying to sort of differentiate the truth and the false in what you're doing. And when you do that, you have a better sense of what you're hearing from others, is where I really need to tune into, and others where I don't, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yes. So that begs the next question, which is then how do you push back while still enabling the person's confidence to do what we just described, right? In
Yeah.
terms of continually communicate, to be open to communicating and giving us feedback as opposed to shutting them down or, you know.
Yeah. I had a couple of sellers who really pushed back on being open-minded and doing things differently.
Mm,
And they really pushed back. And so I think some people will be open. Part of that was me. I didn't listen to them as well as I could have, or a leader or two.
mhm,
Um, so I think it was both of us.
mhm.
Um, so, and some people will select to stay around and others won't, because what they're asked to do does not believe or align with how they want to do it.
Right. Yeah. The word that comes to mind as you were talking about that, as frankly, soon after I asked it, was culture, right? In other words, maybe there's just a cultural misalignment or even a mission real misalignment. In other words, like
Yeah.
business wants to go in this direction, but if there's so much pushback, then maybe the business isn't for them, right?
Yeah, because you try to do it in a logical sense. The buyers want this, they respond to this.
Mm,
The data shows this is what is working. And if you don't do this, you're almost on your own, unless
mhm,
if you're on your own, if it doesn't show the results. The business, we run for profit, right? I mean, we have to, we are a for-profit business, and most businesses are. So there is a defined experience that enables a good experience for clients, right? If
mhm.
I don't deliver, if I deliver coffee cold every morning, I'm gonna go to the Starbucks that has warm coffee,
Sure,
right? And
sure.
so customers do self-select themselves on the best experience. And so, at a high level, as a CRO or leader, I'm responsible for articulating the vision, mission, and how we're going to do it. That it provides a great experience for my target, my customer, and customers will self-select who they want. And so, yeah, some will fit and some will not fit. But I do everything in my power, because as a leader, if people see that this leader's doing everything in their power to support, that builds a good culture.
What about the maverick salesperson who bucks the norm, I guess, as far as what you're trying to coach
Yeah.
and teach? They're successful. How are you supposed to handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jay. And I've experienced some of those. And I will say how we responded to it. You put up it. What happens? You generally put up with it as long as you can put up with it,
Mm, mm,
and you have to manage. And now, what I mean by that, well, they're producing 2 or 3 times more than others, right? You try to build a culture or a response that, hey, there's a point where you talk about how good what they're doing, how you're doing it, and there's a point that people will, most sellers will say, that's them. I can't be like that person. I'm just not that kind of person, right?
mm,
So there's a point where people decide, I can do this part, how that person, but I can't be this person.
mhm,
So there's a decision point where people decide, I can do this part. I take what I like and leave the rest.
mhm,
Um, if it come and then there's some management of that person. Hey, you know, uh, you're a maverick. I can't have 89 mavericks out of 90 salespersons. That won't work.
Right.
There's no consistency of process,
Right.
and there's no predictability. And so you have to work both angles. You have to talk to them and say, hey, this is the reality. We're trying to scale. So we have to talk about scale and repeatability and work with that person and try to get them to understand a bigger picture. And the rest of the teams, you have to sort of enforce, take what you like and leave the rest. And this is our process, and help them become better at their process. But there's a point where there's a defining point where it doesn't work sometimes.
Well, I have two thoughts. One is going back to the football analogy, I guess. I'm not even sure if that's the right word, but where you have, I'll go back, way back, Deion Sanders shutting down one side of the field and everybody else is playing zone, right? Which is great. That works in that construct. Or even you have these wide receivers who are just sort of, mavericks in and of themselves, that and all that type of stuff. But then there's also the flip side that comes to mind, and I wonder what you think about this. Maybe everybody else has it wrong, right? In other words, maybe the 89 people have it wrong and that person has it right. And does Joe Breen being the servant leader go, okay, maybe all of the best things that this person is doing is the way everybody should do it. And now we have to figure out a way to rewrite the playbook, operationalize that, and get everybody else.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all that. I think you do. I think you do take those best practices of that person and do it, right? And I think of some sellers who were that way. They were so great communicators, and they were able to be more aggressive than the other in asking questions because they were able to create great relationships. They were able to get underneath the hood and asking things that, in relationship building, you get really good at relationship builder, they can ask tougher questions, and some sellers are not as good at that, but they all can have a level of credibility, of expertise, and of trust building, and of the subject matter expert. They all can have that level where the general buyers say, yeah, they know what they're talking about. I will answer that question. And so, going back to the football analogy, they all have to play, the same. They can't play like different zone, and they can't play 3 different zones, right? They have to be working with each other. And hey, if my guy goes deep to your area and you're a safety, you got to pick them up, right? Because I still have, in my responsibility, I still have run first on anything come to my side. So there is a collaboration part always that's required.
Right. So, that safety can't just go, man, I'm not getting that guy.
I don't feel like that. I'm not.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I'm gonna go get the drag. Very interesting. Let me ask one other question before we get into the rapid fire 5. Is, you mentioned, so let's say organizations have the same tools that we talked about, right? In terms of all the recording tools and the access to data and the ability to analyze things, and everybody has the tools, right? What does it come down to if you were to put it into, I don't know, a sentence or a couple of words in terms of why, given the same set of tools, why some leaders just aren't able to get over the hump, right? They just aren't able to get there like you have on multiple occasions. And then people like you who do get there. Like, is there a common denominator there?
That's a great question. And I'm trying to impart this over to my sons, my kids. I have 3 kids, and they're in junior high and high school. I'm trying to impart, all daddy's best knowledge, right?
Well, give it to me.
Just do what I say, you won't have problems, right?
Right.
And they don't listen, right? Or they listen to parts of it, right?
Right.
Anybody whose father's out there will understand that comment. So I think doing what you say you do, that's having a level of integrity. And then if I do what I say or I do, I expect you to do it too. And then simplify it on mission and vision. You can't change course all the time. You can evolve and take learnings, but the vision and mission really has to be simple, and that is sort of your North Star. If we're going to be, if we're going to focus on the client experience, everything we do has to be built around that, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about growth, if you're going to really talk about growth, the whole organization really has to be aligned to growth.
Mm-hmm.
And then you focus on that. And then, yeah, it's good to evolve, right? Your processes should evolve every day, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You're learning a little bit more better how to say it, you tweak it. It should be almost like 2 steps up, 1 step back, and then 2 steps up. You're going sort of like this, constantly evolving. So I think doing what you say you do, and as a leader, being clear on your focus.
Yeah.
And admit when you're wrong.
Humility.
Admit when you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know something.
And I would imagine just within that, when you say admit when you're wrong, is because if you don't admit when you're wrong, that can be really damaging, right? Because then all of a sudden they know you're wrong,
Yeah.
And then you lose credibility, right? And then that mission and vision that you're just talking about, it's not aligned, right?
Yeah, I think, and then the other thing I probably mentioned 3 things. Sorry for bouncing around, but 4th thing is confidence, vision. This is going to work. We're gonna get this done. Hell or high water, we're gonna get this done. And I'm gonna find a way, and we're gonna find a way to be, hell or high water, we're gonna dominate the market.
And that's important for belief, right? In other words,
yes, because I am the one, the leader is the one that conveys that absolutely, no matter what, hell or high water, we're gonna get this done.
Yeah.
That is probably the number 1 thing.
Yep. I like that. That is so important for sure.
Because you have to believe as a leader. And sometimes there's points in the leader that you get a stumbling block, and you get a challenge. Well, I didn't know this. And people come to you for an answer. And sometimes you need to wait. You don't have the best answer. Exactly how, you say, we're get it done. We have to figure it out. Then you go figure it out.
I think that's the flip side of confidence too, right? In other words, when you're confident enough to admit that you were wrong, or admit that you're making a mistake, that's part of the
we'd all drive into potholes on the road. We don't see it, right?
Right. Exactly. Right.
We're not fortune tellers. We can't anticipate every little thing. We're gonna mess up. We're gonna that was a good learning. Yeah, we're gonna pivot. We're gonna learn from that. We're gonna get there though. We're gonna still get there. We're there.
Yep.
Hell or high water, we're going to get there. People feed off that. They want to hear that.
Oh, I was wrong about a big thing recently that I had to basically come to grips with and admit, and just do a mea culpa for sure. And I hope my team respects me for that. And I learned from it. Hopefully they can see that I am learning from it, that I did learn from it, and that they can too as well. Because I think it's important. And that's one of the things that I always talk about too as well, is that, you can't be afraid to make mistakes, because if you're afraid to make mistakes, then you're not trying. Right?
Yeah, that is so true. You can't be afraid. You can't live in fear. When we have a mess up, or something we didn't anticipate, or something we didn't realize, we immediately step into action. Immediately step into action and do something, act to get back into the game. We do something to act on what needs to be done.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Fantastic. You ready for the rapid fire 5?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Number 1, what motivates you?
I would say 3 layers. I'm a spiritual person. Letting go of fear constantly is important. And then taking care of my family, which has to do with financial results.
Name a big goal you have right now and when you would like to accomplish it.
I want to have another event within 4 years. I've had several events where be a part of selling company and making a big return. Another one in 4 years.
What's your most preferred way to learn new information and to stay sharp?
Taking notes and reading my notes.
How many hours of sleep do you average per night?
5 to 6.
Sounds familiar. What's your favorite thing to do when you're not working?
Watching college football. My second thing is hiking in mountains.
All right. So let me ask you another question that I started in the last episode, which I believe was episode 95. If you're listening right now, it's either 95 or 96, which is started asking my guests if they had one question that they could ask my next guest, what would it be? So my previous guest, Rusbe Rotabi, wanted to ask me to ask you, reflecting on your career, how high has the highest high been, and how low was the lowest low?
Yeah, the highest was when we executed the Dell acquisition.
Mhm.
It was a great financial win. As the result of the actions we took, we were so-called correct in our go-to-market assumptions, and it was validated by a purchase
Mhm.
that was beneficial.
That's so fantastic. What was your lowest low?
My lowest low was a role I had a couple of times ago where I was brought in to turn it around, and the founders and the PE, we all had different angles. 3 different angles, and I assumed we were all on the same page, and we weren't immediately after about a week, and we never could get on the same page, and we grew 31%, but I left after that year because we couldn't. It was conflicting, the founders and my approach, and I we're trying to collaborate in the PE firm, and we all just sort of threw up our hands and said this is not going to work, and the PE firm sold the company a year after. So that was a learning experience, because it's good to have something not work out, because sometimes when you have several successes, you think you can go into any situation and fix, and you can't do that. You have to know your limitations. You have to know your limitations.
Yeah, that's a good lesson for everybody, especially when we hear it from someone like you with that kind of success. So let me ask you, if I were to ask, what would you like for me to ask the next guest? What one question do you think would be a good question to ask the next guest?
What do they do every evening, or what? Everybody has a contemplative spirit or period where they realize how good they're doing and what they're doing. What do they do themselves personally to evolve their thinking?
What do they do for themselves personally to evolve their thinking?
Yeah, or their mindset.
Yes, love it. I like this. This is a good feature. I'm keeping this part of the podcast. Do you like that? I mean, that's pretty good, right? To have
Yeah.
Cool. Now I've got you as a listener. You want to know the answer to your question. You got to come back and listen.
That's right.
How can people reach out to you to say thank you, to ask any questions, frankly, that I didn't ask that maybe they're curious about? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm via LinkedIn or email. My personal email is 34breen@gmail.com. You can reach out to me, LinkedIn, respond. So
34breen@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Joe, thank you for going over quota.
Jay, thank you for doing this.
Bye, everybody. Cue in the music.
Okay, bye-bye.